Thanks for watching my YouTube channel, Rick Surowicz Watercolor. This is the narrated step-by-step tutorial for my painting Winter Tangle. The photograph on the right was a reference for this painting, although I made a number of changes to the overall composition. This is a value study from my sketchbook. This is where I do some of the problem solving in advance of beginning my finished painting. This is my sketch on a 11 by 15 inch sheet of 140 pound cold press watercolor paper. I've drawn the major shapes with a little bit of detail. As I often do in some of my winter scenes, I like to splatter some liquid masking fluid over the page before I begin to start my painting. I like the sparkle and the feeling of snow blowing around that it gives. There's also a couple areas where I want to maintain the pure white of the paper on the edges of some of the branches, some of the branch shapes. And I'll also just make a few thin line marks just to give the suggestion of some light branches that have snow on them, and I like the texture and the pattern that it gives. Not too many, just a little bit. Before I begin to paint, I'll list the colors that I used in the painting. I begin with cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, royal blue, rose madder quinacridone, sap green, raw umber, raw sienna, quinacridone coral, and gamboge. I'll begin working wet on dry, and I'm using a mixture of gamboge and quinacridone coral. So that gives me kind of a warm orangey red tone, and I'll add a little bit more water to it and a little more gamboge. It's not an intense mixture, it's thinned out quite a bit with water. And next I'm going to take cerulean blue and put that at the top of this shape that I'm painting, the sky shape. So I'm going to merge these two together. So I started with the warm mixture at the bottom, and then I'm bringing the cerulean blue down into the warmer wash and letting those two merge. Now I'll do the same on the right side. So the cerulean blue is just pure cerulean blue that I've mixed with water on my palette. And now I've let that merge into the warmer mixture of gamboge and quinacridone coral. I'm going to take those same colors and I'm going to bring those down into the area where there's still open water. So it's going to pick up the reflection of those colors from the sky. So when you look at the contour of the land here, I'm going to have open water, I'm going to have an area that's frozen over with ice, and then I'll have a large area that's snow covered. So this is the area where there's open water. So I've picked up the reflection of both the warm and cool tones from the sky. Here I'm going to add a little bit more cerulean blue. I'm going to thin that out a little bit with water. I don't want it quite that strong. And again, I've let these colors merge together on the paper. My paper is still very wet for my sky wash, so I'm going to come in with some raw umber and give the suggestion of some distant trees and bushes and shrubs. And because my paper is wet, this is raw umber that I'm putting down, is going to diffuse and create soft edges to give the suggestion of distance and for these trees. And if this had gotten much drier, if it had gotten to a damp state and I came in and did this, I'd get some blossoms more than likely. But the paper was still very wet, so the color that I put down just just runs and moves with the paint that was on the paper instead of pushing it away when the paper is damp. Now I'm going to put in some soft washes to represent some of the distant field that's out there. Could be hay or some straw that's in the distance there, and I'm going to soften those up a little bit with a fine mist spray, and just bring some touches of that along that snow area, because there's some grass, some straw growing, and I'm going to soften that too, just I want to have that tone there, but I don't want hard edges. So it's just a soft representation of a gathering of brush and grass and straw. There's a distant hill that's a cool tone. I'm going to paint it with a mixture of ultramarine blue, quinacridone, rose madder, and I'm going to put a little bit of raw sienna in it, just to help neutralize it a little bit. On either side of the open water, there's an area of ice. So I'm going to represent that with a mixture of royal blue, sap green, and pyrola red. So it gives me a kind of an icy blue-green tone. And I'm going to vary the value a little bit by changing the amount of water I add to the mixture. So I'm applying this with a 1/2 inch flat brush. This patch of ice runs between the open water and the bank of snow on either side of the river. And I'm going to leave just a few white marks there, some snow on it, and just take that wash all the way to the edge of the paper. And you can see a little darker on this end than it is the other end. And that ice doesn't stop at the tree, so I'll have to pick it up on the other side here and continue that blue-green tone to suggest the ice that's continuing down the bank of the waterway. Now I'm going to begin to paint some of this snowbank, and I've inserted the original photograph in the top left corner there. Now you can see how dark that is compared to some of those areas where the light's hitting. So I'm using a mixture here of ultramarine blue with some rose madder, quinacridone. At times I'll put some cobalt blue in there, and I'm going to vary the ratios of these colors. And from time to time I might stick a little bit of raw sienna in there to neutralize my mixture. But if you compare this to what's going on in the photograph, you can see that area is casting shadow. If you look at what I've done so far, I'm looking past the objects. I'm looking past the rocks and the trees and branches and grassy shapes. I'm looking at the large shapes of value and color that are underneath this scene: the sky, the water, the icy stretch of frozen water, the snowbanks, the shadows of some of this. I didn't start by singling out little objects and starting to paint them and paint around them. I am painting around with these large washes, but I'm looking at the wash in terms of a big shape. I'm not painting little pieces of it. So when you're attempting to paint a subject, think about in your planning stages where you need to start. Where are you going to launch your painting from? So there's a bit of a ridge here where this tree is up on, and it dips down to a flatter area, which is covered with snow also. So I'm carrying these same tones down here. However, now I'm starting to introduce a bit more blue to it. A little bit of cobalt blue, some touches of ultramarine blue, and I want to differentiate some of these shadowed areas that are on this flat area where the shadows of the trees are being cast, and I want to differentiate these shadows a little bit from what's in the right there by the tree that's more up on the ridge, which is more of a red purple or red violet tone. So down here where it starts to get flat, I'm getting a much deeper blue and even a violet, but a darker violet here, a little bit darker value to differentiate the two. And I'm trying to draw the viewer in that area, and I want stronger contrast. One of the things to keep in mind when you're painting shadows of these trees is that the shadows being cast by sunlight, they're all going to pretty much go in the same direction. They're going to be parallel. While there are some that will go at different angles. There's branches and trees that are going different angles, and they're going to cast some odd shadows. But in general, the tree trunks are going to be fairly parallel in the shadows that they cast. I'm going to take some of the same color mixture up on this tree trunk where the side of the tree has been coated with snow, and the geometry of that tree is going to cast some shadows in some of those areas of snow. So I'll be using the same color for those shadows, these violet, blue violet, and red violet tones. I'm going to take my brush, it's a 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm just going to make some marks on the other side of this waterway where, again, you have a snowy bank that comes up to the area of ice or right before it hits the water. So I'm not trying to render anything specific. I'm just giving touches of this color, and here I'm going to get some indication of some shadow on that hill. And it's a little odd because there is a hillside here. It could affect it. But I'm not painting a lot of strong shadow. I'm just giving an indication that there's some shadows being cast up there. Now these shadows are going to continue on to the ice. So I'm going to take the same mixture that I used to put down the initial wash on this area of ice, the sap green, royal blue, with some a little bit of pyrrole red in it to gray it down a little. But I've got a darker value mixture, so I don't have as much water in my mixture. And I'm going to continue these shadows on, and there's just a little bit of a step down from the snowbank to the ice, so these shadows shift a little bit. But just giving the suggestion of those shadows being cast across that ice. And then they're going to go from edge to edge, and they also have some irregular things going on because of the branches that are casting shadows and some of the unevenness in the ice. But as I take this value back, it's a dark value, and I'm making some of these marks. They get very thin, but they still go the same direction as these shadows are being cast more towards the middle and foreground. I'm going to take some of this value and just make some marks along the edge, and I'm going to get the other side here where you're going to see that edge from the angle that we're at. You'll see some dark edge there, so I'm going to take my flat brush and make some marks here, just to give indication of the edge of that ice on the other side. want to fill in a bit more of this area, more towards the foreground, with just a larger area of this darker value. So I'm going to paint over what I've done there and just fill that in just a little bit. Now I'm going to take some a mixture with some raw umber, royal blue in it, and might put a touch of rose madder in it. But I'm going to paint the dark side of this tree, and I'm using my 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm just dragging the side of that brush a little bit here and there to give a little texture and simulate the roughness of that tree and the irregularity and where some of that snow is hit. And this mixture here that I'm putting in now is a little cooler than what I did on the right side of that tree shape. So I have a little bit more royal blue in my mixture. And just bringing that down to indicate that tree. And it's going to get broken up a little bit as it gets here towards the bottom, because there's just little almost splattering of snow on some areas of this tree. I hope you notice that I'm not using a teeny tiny brush and whittling away at this tree. I've just taken this flat brush, making some expressive brush strokes, and then just moving on. And I'm using this same approach to some of these rocks that are at the base of the tree, where some of the stone is showing through the snow. I just take this flat brush with this dark value and just make some brush marks here to indicate some of the rocks that's exposed. And here there's a branch that's fallen down and is leaning into the water. So now I'm going to paint that with this dark value, still using my 1/2 inch flat brush. Now I've switched to a rigger brush. This is a number 6 rigger brush. So I have two sizes that I use. I have a number 6 and a number 1. The 1 is much thinner, and the 6 gives a nice size to paint some of these saplings and branches. In my initial sketch, I gave an indication where some of these larger saplings and branches are at, but I come in and I just ad-lib a little bit and just put some in to suggest the overall activity in my reference. I don't try and paint each individual branch, but I do try to capture the placement and size and direction of some of them that are in my reference photo. But these marks that I'm making right now, these are just brush marks that I'm putting down to give the suggestion of the branches and saplings that are that overall activity in this area. But I'm not necessarily trying to replicate the exact placement of something from my photograph, but something such as that larger tree I just painted was actually one I pulled out of the photograph. And on the left, on the kind of the distant hill there, where I put some washes earlier on to suggest distant trees, I have indicated with some pencil marks where some of those tree shapes are going to be from my reference photo, but I'll put in many others just to help fill in and give the suggestion of the overall activity that's in that area. Now I'm going to move across to the other side of the composition here, to the other side of the riverbank, and I'm going to paint some of these trees here that are on this distant hillside. And some are right on the hillside, and then some are behind it, and they get cut off by the edge, such as the one I'm painting here. It stops right at the edge because it's on the other side of this hill. And the ones that are on the hill, they don't end with a straight line. They're on a hill, so the bottom where they plant into the snow is at an angle that follows the contour of that hillside. I want to indicate more of these branches and saplings and twigs and things that are coming from the right into this picture and coming out of the snow area. There's a lot of sticks and branches and little saplings that are coming up. And when you're painting something like this, don't be timid and only put a couple marks down. There's literally thousands of branches and twigs crossing and sticking out of the snow and coming from the side that you're trying to represent here. By no means am I going to paint 1,000 sticks and twigs, but I make enough marks, brush marks here, to suggest the level of activity that's there. I'm going to insert the photo in the top left there, and if you look at the right corner top right corner and edge of that photograph, look at the amount of branches and sticks and twigs that are there. There's thousands of them. So I've just barely started to scratch the surface in terms of the activity that's there. So I'll be putting many more brush marks in this area. And you can see I'm continuing to put some of these brush marks, and some are shorter than others, some are longer. They go at different angles, they crisscross, and it's just suggestive of the level of activity that's there in my reference photo. So again, when I'm making these marks right now, I'm not looking at my photograph and trying to copy each stick and twig. I do look at it to get an idea of overall direction and length and placement, but a lot of it I do just to try and put these elements in a manner that they enhance the overall composition. And I sprayed some of these while they're still wet with a soft fine mist spray that just lets some color run off those branches and diffuse a little bit and create some softness so they're not all just hard edged. Coming back in with a mixture of raw umber and royal blue and just giving an indication of where some of these rocks are peeking through the snow. I'm going to take the same dark value to the other side, using my 1/2-inch flat brush. I'm just kind of rotating it around, letting different parts of the brush, different edges, touch the paper, just to suggest this kind of rocky shoreline over there on the other side. I want to go a little deeper with the shadowed violets, red violets, blue violets that I'm using here. So I've got my 1/2-inch flat brush, and I'm just coming in with a bit darker mixture. And this particular mixture here has a little touch of raw sienna in it to gray it down a little. But you can see that I don't take little brushes and inch my way around the composition. I make big, bold strokes, just make a statement with my brush, and I move on. Now I'm going to go down to this flat area, and I'm going to go darker with it, but I'm also going to go more intense with the color, with the blue color. You can see, if you compare what I'm putting down now with what I just put down to the lower right corner, what I'm putting in now is much bluer, much more intense. They're very close in value, but the color intensity is greater. And I like to get some of those nice blue tones and some of these shadows that are being cast on the snow. But hopefully this color shift and this intensity helps differentiate this foreground corner here, where it's very much in a kind of a gray shadow. as it relates to what's more towards the middle ground and down on that lower plane there with the more intense blue as it's getting closer to the sunlit areas. I'm going to go back to the other side of my composition there, the other side of the waterway there, where there's a lot more activity with the trees and saplings. So I'm going to come back in with a rigger brush. This time I have my #1 rigger brush, so these are thinner marks than what I made with my #6. And much as I did here on the right side, I'm just trying to step up the activity there. Here I'm hitting it with a spray to let some of that paint run and get some soft edges amongst all these trees. Because when you look at trees in the distance, they get a little hazy. They're not all hard edged. But here, again, just coming in, making some of these marks. These aren't ones that I'm necessarily picking out of the composition, but it's the activity that I'm picking out of the composition and trying to suggest in that area. Here I'm going to make some marks to represent some of these little saplings and sticks coming out of the ground here on the edge, right in around the rocks. And right now, some of these tree shapes, they're all very vertical without much horizontal or diagonal activity. So I'm going to come back into those areas. And I'm going to put some branches and some twigs and some things just jetting in different directions here. I'm going to come back in with some cobalt blue and put a light wash around the edges of some of these shadows. And also I'm going to tone down this area here in the foreground where this snow, this stretch of white where the snow is laying flat. I don't want it to be equal from the foreground all the way back to the kind of deep middle ground there. I want to differentiate the two. So I'm putting a little bit more of a wash here in the foreground and toning the contrast down just to help push the eye back a little bit more towards what's going on around that tree and lead you into the tree and the activity there and all the branches and some of that stronger contrast. I'm going to take a little bit more on that shoreline over there too and on the hill and just tone some of that white down so that I don't have the same level of contrast everywhere in my composition. Now I'm going to come back with even a darker valued violet, blue violet in these areas where I just put some of this wash. I just want to deepen that shadow a little bit. Still not going to have the range of contrast that I had before I put that glaze down, but I want to differentiate this a little bit more from this the little edge where the tree's at, the little part of the hill there in the corner. So I want to differentiate that still a bit more. So this is a nice blue. It's an ultramarine blue with some cobalt. And don't be afraid to go back and paint over something if you think you need to make an adjustment, because keep in mind that watercolor dries about 30% lighter than when it's first applied. So sometimes when you think you've got a dark value, once it's dry, it's not quite as dark as you had planned. So there's nothing wrong with going back and deepening that value if that's what's needed. And you can see here now I'm getting a nice contrast in this area here that kind of leads to this tree and some of the activity there. But I've put about 3 or 4 layers of these violet, red violet, blue violet tones here. Just as I decided I wanted to go darker and some of those shadows on that area where the snow's lying flat, I want to do the same on the area where the ice is, that kind of a grayish blue-green. So I'm going back with a darker value there to help match up with the values that I have coming across that snow. And I'm just using a general purpose round brush just to make some of these marks to strengthen the shadow across the area of ice. I'm going to take some of this dark mixture and paint some of the edges and paint this shape on the other side darker. I want to differentiate it a bit more from the open water area. They're too close in value right now, and it's hard to discern one from the other. So I've come in with a darker value of this mixture of this blue-green gray tone. I've dried everything completely, and now I'm going to take some clear water. I'm going to put it over top of this area that represents the open water in this this waterway. So I'm using a 1/2 inch flat brush and just dropping in clear water, and I'm going to come back into this wet area with some dark values that represent the reflection of some of these trees and some of the area around the edge of the shore. And so I'm dropping this into the area that where I wet the paper, so I'm getting soft edges. The color starts to diffuse once I put it into the area that's wet. I want to make sure I'm trying to follow some of the angles of these trees so it looks like it's a reflection. So this is a mixture with some raw umber in it, a little royal blue. And you want to try and space these in an irregular manner. And now I'm going to come in and put some of that right along the edge just to suggest it's picking up some of the reflections of the rocks and the shoreline. I don't want to overdo it because I still want some of that sky tone to show through, but just want to pick up just enough to indicate the reflections of the background there. I'm going to go a little darker in a few areas. And you have to do this when it's pretty wet. I'm going to come back along the edge there a little bit with some of this darker value also, just to deepen that value right at the edge where some of those rocks might be reflecting. So I'm strengthening some of these tree trunks. And now I'm going to just put some of that along the edge. And that's still wet, so it'll give me a soft edge on the side that's wet. Once again, I'm going to go a little darker on this ice. In fact, I'm going along the edge here to give the impression that the bank from the snow is casting a bit of a shadow down onto this icy area, because it's just a slight drop from the snow-covered area down to the area that's frozen. And so just trying to strengthen that, the suggestion of that, using this darker value. Going across to the edge there of that ice on the other side, because you're going to see some of the thickness of that ice from this side. So now I'm just using this dark value just to give the indication that there's a bit of an edge on that ice. I'm going to take this dark mixture of royal blue and raw umber and just splatter a little bit in the painting. I like the texture created by splatter. That's why I like to splatter some masking fluid before I start. It gives that kind of a sparkle when I remove it, and this will complement that splatter from the masking fluid. So I'll have the light and the dark texture that's very similar. Now I'm going to take my rubber cement pickup eraser. I'm going to remove the masking fluid that I put down earlier, the splatter and a few lines that I had put in there. And you can start to see how I get that kind of a white sparkle, that splatter in those areas where all those branches are at. Now I'm going to put a mat around this to get a good look at it. And there you have my painting, Winter Tangle. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed painting it. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel and join my mailing list so you're always receiving the latest information about my videos, workshops, and courses. To join, you can click on one of the boxes on the screen, or you'll find the links in the description of this video.